And if I might, and I would like to summarize what we talked about in case you weren't here last week, by way of summary. Life from birth to death and everything in between. Remember that little literary device, the merism, that Solomon was using here in his poem. Everything that we learn, everything is in God's control. That is, He is working out His plan from eternity past in and through our lives. And while He's using the choices that we make and the free will that He has given to us, He still does all and accomplishes His ultimate plan, regardless of the choices that we make, on account He already knew what choices we would make. He allowed us to make them, but He knew what we would do. When I think of that, I think, what a powerful, powerful God. He's not powerful because He made you do it. He's powerful because He knew what you were going to choose, and He still is going to accomplish His plan and will. To me, that is so much more sovereign than Him making you do something. You can't thwart a God like that. And He's our God. You certainly can't put that kind of God in our pocket. He's much bigger, much more powerful. And yet, at the end of it all, Solomon still realizes that life under the sun does not answer the questions of where is the profit or what is the use here on this earth, on account that these cycles of life that are bordered by birth and death continue on, and for what? Where's the advantage? Well, we've learned that the answer to this and other questions similar are not to be found in life under the sun. For the answer for which we seek cannot simply be found here upon this earth. We need to look above and beyond the sun, into heaven, into the presence of God, because it's there that the answers to our questions will be found. It's where they will always be found. Well, as we concluded last week, we noted some things that one Bible teacher had suggested we should pay attention to, and I thought, yes. And so we ended with three things that we noted from our study last week. First, that God has made everything appropriate or beautiful in its time. You know, many times in this earth, under the sun, life under the sun, our lives and things that are going on in our lives and people we know and love, and it looks sometimes like a confused collage of clashing colors. It doesn't make any sense. We're on the backside of the tapestry. Or we're too close to the mosaic to see the details. But it's only when we consider, we step back and we consider from God's perspective, that we begin to see, oh, there actually is order to this, to all these colors. They begin to come in, and there's actually a great image, a great picture there that we can begin to see, because we're not right up on it. We're stepping back away from it, looking at it from God's perspective. And from that vantage point, from God's vantage point, everything is beautiful in its time. He brings those things out of it. How God doesn't create evil. He doesn't do evil. And yet He can bring incredible blessings out of evil. Maybe it's someone who's gone through a really difficult thing, something that's been forced upon them in one way or another. And then out of that relationship, maybe they come to know Jesus Christ as their Savior and will be God's forever. Well, they don't want to go through that bad thing they went through, the evil thing that had happened to them, because of someone exercising their sinful free will. And yet out of that, they came to know Christ and will spend eternity in His presence, and nothing can ever change that. Second thing that we learned was that God has put eternity in our hearts. There, whether people know it or not, there is this hole in our soul, in our being. God made us in His image, and God is eternal. He made us male and female. So God's image is displayed in not in just male, not just in female, but in man and women together. We find the image of God, and He's eternal, and one of those characteristics that he created us to live forever. I talked about the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, that he mercifully kept Adam and Eve away from that tree, right? Because if they had eaten that, they would live forever in their sins. And so there's eternity in our hearts. There's a hole. There's something, no matter who you talk to. You talk to most people, not maybe most, but you talk to some people and you believe in a hell. Well, no, I don't believe in a hell. Do you believe in a heaven? Well, yeah, I think there's something. What is that? They don't know what it is. They don't know how to get there. Maybe they don't know. But there's something. Because is there something that God has created within us that there's got to be more than just what we see here on this earth, because it doesn't make any sense. Well, again, the answer to that question, we have to go above the sun. We can't just look under the sun. We don't get the answers here. We have to go above the sun and what God has told us. And obviously, the writer of Hebrews puts it this way. In other words, we got to search for God on his grounds, on his way. We can't choose the way we want to do it. No, you got to come to him the way he set it up. The writer of Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. You can work your life away, but you're going to please him by doing works. No. You have to come. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that God, is a rewarder of those who seek him through faith. Listen, if we want to ready ourselves for eternity and to fill that eternal void, that thing that God has created within us, then we need to accept God's Son, Jesus Christ, by faith, just as we read as simply as it's put in John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him, in Jesus, should not perish but have everlasting life. How simple is that? A child can understand that truth. How am I right with God? I believe in his Son, Jesus. He died for me, paid for my sins. And then third, we also talked about we cannot discover God's eternal plan. We don't know how God's doing what he's doing in our lives, and sometimes there's things that come into our lives and it's like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't like this. This is not good. And yet, God knew this is all part. We're participating with God in this whole plan. We may not have chose the bad or the good or whatever's going on. We didn't choose it. And if you think that you know everything there is and that you can discover God's eternal plan from the beginning to the end, and you're part of it, as I said last week, you're a fool on a fool's errand. God is gracious. He has given us certain information in his Bible about what his big game plan is. But how does that all work out on a day-to-day basis in life under the sun with all these cycles? Starting every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. And then everything else fits in there. That dash in between the birth and the death. But listen, because of his word, we can and we do find purpose and worth in life if we will seek to understand and apply the scriptures, what he has revealed. As one great Bible teacher said, it's not what God hasn't revealed that bothers me. It's what he has revealed that bothers me. Because as I read the pages, I'm not doing that. I'm not living up to that. Let me just warn you, though, if you choose to remain ignorant of the truth of God's word that it unveils and confirms, then we will only see futility, emptiness, frustrations, no satisfaction here in life under the sun. Well, that's what we talked about last week. Now, let's go on to what do we do with this? Well, Solomon is gracious because he's going to help us to have some almost an application of sorts here, something I can do with this. And so let's consider our second main point, our response to God's plan. As I mentioned, it's important that we keep, last week, it's important that we keep these 4 verses connected with verses 1 through 11. If we'd have had time, we'd have done it all last week there, but somebody would have been getting hungry, and alarms would have been going off, and people's stomachs would have been growling, and we wouldn't have been able to get anything done. So we didn't, we stopped. But just remember, verses 12 through 15 sticks with verses 1 through 11. It's all part and parcel. They go together. And the 2 things that Solomon shares with us, and these are neat things, I think, at least to me they are, in light of God's plan. Now, God's plan consists of all these things up there in verses 1 through 8 and verses 9 through 11, but this whole cycle that he's put into place of birth and death, and all these other cycles in between, a time to rend and a time to sow, and a time to weep and a time to laugh, and a time, all of those down through, all fit within, and they're ongoing. They continue on. They keep doing, and not just in our generation, but generations before us and generations after us, and it just keeps on going. This is what he set in order. And so the first thing I want us to see is in verses 12 and 13 that Solomon shares with us, even in the midst of all of this monotonous and these things we have no control over, and these things happen, and we find ourselves in the midst of them. Solomon says, recognize what God gives us. Recognize what God gives you, what he gives me. For this point, the next one, I've kind of borrowed a rough outline off another Bible teacher. I'm not going to recreate the wheel when he's done it. I did tweak it so that it fits my style, but it wasn't. I don't think I've ever had an original thought in my life, anyways. You think about it, and you think that oh, this is really good, and then you read someone's already read it. So they not only thought it, they wrote it down. It's like, I thought I was the only one that came up with this. We are dealing with God's word, so it is what it is. Well, the first thing I want us to consider under recognize what God gives us, the first thing, what does he give us? The first thing, he gives us the ability to rejoice and enjoy life. Even in the midst of all these cycles and these things that are going on, you got no control on. I know that nothing is better for them, for the sons of Adam, the sons of men, than to rejoice. Isn't that what makes life nice? Don't you like to get together, or even just in the silence, even maybe you're just by yourself, and there's just something that you realize that this is so good, and you enjoy it and you rejoice in it. Or you get together with someone and you have a party with someone and you enjoy the time there. Or you play cribbage with them, or whatever it is you're doing, and you have a good time talking and laughing. Maybe it's Yahtzee. Anybody still play Yahtzee? Anybody know what Yahtzee is? I remember playing with my grandmother. Oh my word. She loved to play Yahtzee. Then someone got to the one that's like, it was like 3 levels or something. I mean, it was crazy anyways, and she didn't like to lose. Anyway, I could tell you a lot of stories there. I wonder what she's playing in heaven right now. Probably Peter, Apostle Peter's there, and Paul or someone, and she's got him playing Yahtzee. No, there's nothing better in life than to want to rejoice. Have you ever seen a person who didn't have God really, really or truly, other than just a really little, maybe even the joy that they might be showing is misplaced. But have you ever really seen them enjoying life on a regular basis? I mean, just in rejoicing and thanking God for this he's given to us. Have you ever seen someone like that doesn't know God or have any inkling about God? I'm not saying they're necessarily a believer, but someone who maybe one that I've never seen is someone who denies that there is a God. And often what I've seen with those individuals is most of the time I see that they're unhappy, they're complaining, They're never satisfied. They're blaming everyone and everything for their misfortunes. They're just an unhappy individual. Very self-centered. All they want is what they want. And when they don't get their way, they pout. Life is miserable. They certainly aren't known for rejoicing. You see, there's a reason for that, and that's because, as we'll see, all four of these things here are a gift from God that we're talking about in these two verses here. These are a gift from God. God gives you joy. In the midst of heartache, in the midst of difficulty, in the midst of struggling, God can still give. I'm not talking happiness or flippantness or anything. I'm talking about a joy in Him. You know, only individuals who really can enjoy and exude in the gift of rejoicing are the ones who believe, the ones who follow God through His Son, Jesus Christ. That doesn't mean that when you come to know Christ as Savior, everything's a party from then on. We know that's not true. Life is hard sometimes, terribly hard. But imagine facing it without God. Imagine facing it without the hope of tomorrow and the reality that we'll spend eternity in His presence and that He will deal with all those wrongs that have been wronged and done and everything. He'll deal with it. When we look at things from God's perspective, we have a refreshing hope from Him that's needed to sustain a life of joy. As one man put it, regardless, and I mean regardless. Chuck Swindoll related the following story. He said, I heard about a man who gave his business to God. He had hassled over it for years. He said he wrestled with it and he fought it for 2 decades. And then one day he decided, I've had it, that's enough. And he had heard from his pastor that Sunday morning about the value of turning his entire business over to God. It was when he drove away from church that he decided he had worried enough, and by the time he got home, he had totally and unequivocally committed his business to God. That night, his place of business caught fire. He got an emergency call, and he rather calmly drove down to the commercial residence and was standing on the street watching his place go up in flames. He sort of was smiling to himself. One of his colleagues raced to his side and questioned his relaxed attitude and that he was smiling. He says, "Man, don't you know what's happened to your, well, it's burning up, it's all going away." And the man replied, I know it. It's no problem, Fred. This morning I gave this company to God, and if He wants to burn it up, that's His business. Do you trust God that much? That in the midst of those things that don't make any sense, that you can stand there smiling saying, I gave it to Him this morning. Or, last night I gave it to Him. And that's what He's doing. Because He has a plan. And He loves you. Trust Him. Listen, not even fire or any other destruction like that can take the gift of rejoicing from you when God gives it to you. And realize this, if you are His child through faith in Christ, He has given you the ability to rejoice and enjoy life no matter what. As the one guy said, regardless, and I mean regardless. The second thing that He's given us, you and me, is He's given us the ability to do good in our lifetime. The end of verse 12, it says, and to do good in their lives. to rejoice, the gift he's given to rejoice, and to do good in their lives. There are many people in this life who do good things. And I think for the most part, most people do good things because if I do good things, maybe people will do good things to me. There's a reciprocating kind of thing. The golden rule, right? And so we go about our lives because, it's how I'd want to be treated, so I'll treat you the way I'd like to be treated. Nothing wrong with that. But how many of you have ever been the recipient of a pay it forward? You know what I'm talking about? You pull up to the drive-thru and said, "Oh, it's all paid for. The guy ahead, he just paid for you." And they just said, "Just pay it forward." And so you take it on yourself to go do something. Maybe you go to Dunkin' Donuts and you hand them, you buy your coffee and you hand them a 10 and say, "Pay for the next however many people will come in." Not very many, obviously, but pay for the next whatever that comes in and just say, "Pay it forward." Times it's kind of fun. I've gone for so many years with that never happened, and then I think within the last few years, I think it's happened 3 or 4 times that people have done something. And let me just say this: have you ever started a pay forward? That's kind of fun too. Because first of all, you don't even know the person behind you, what they're going through, what's going on in their life, or whatever, and you don't even know what that may mean to them that you did that. God has given each of us, his own children, the gift to do good in and with our lives. So let me ask you this: what are you doing? What are you doing? After all, when you're dead and you're gone, because you're born and you die, there's that parameter that God has set. There are borders. After you're dead, what good are you going to do? Well, you could leave some wealth and possessions to your loved one or loved ones, and I'm sure you'll do that if you have anything left. But perhaps it could have been used to help them while you were still living. Perhaps you could have used it to help when they've had a need, or they've needed something to fix something, or whatever it might be, that you could have taken care of it by doing good. And not only that, but then you could enjoy the fact that you could see them enjoying the thing that you helped them with. That gift that God gives us, right? There are many ways to do good in life. You can do things through, financial relief, or express your availability, as one man put it, to help through a hard time, to babysit or house sit, or help someone purchase a car, or help them fix a car, or whatever it is that they need help with. Maybe it's firewood or fuel oil, or to help a struggling single parent with maybe a gift card for some gas, or a gift card to Hannaford, or how about having someone just over, someone that's a bachelor or something that's or a widow or a widower, and have them over for a home-cooked meal. Something as simple as that. Listen, God has given every one of us who know Jesus Christ as Savior the ability to do good in this life. Once we were controlled by the old man and the old sinful habits. Because we were self-centered, we were selfish. But we don't have to be that way anymore, because he's created within us a new man that's alive by his Spirit. Now, can we be selfish as Christians? Oh, yes, we can. But we don't have to be. That's the difference. As followers of Christ, we have his Spirit that indwells us. And we can think about others and not just ourselves. Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Right? Especially 3 and 4. I guess the question, and as we seek to do good in this life, with the life that God has given us, within the cyclical things we find ourselves in, all these situations and things that we have no control over, and we can take joy in it, we can do good, and God gets the glory for it. Can we not rejoice in that too? The third thing, and this is a great one, the third thing that God gives us, and I know we'll all enjoy this, is an appetite to eat and drink. Oh, don't look so smug like, this isn't important to you. And also that every man should eat and drink. You know, food and drink are necessary for life. You stop eating and you stop drinking, and it's only a matter of days and you'll no longer be alive. But when you think about it, there are a lot of foods, there are foods that God could have given us that we could eat that really are not very appealing or appetizing. But if you ate them, then you would preserve your life. And so, I mean, we could be like the Israelites, and they got kind of bummed out when God kept giving them manna, whatever that was, and they got the manna, and they got it every day, every morning, but you couldn't keep any extra. You could just eat what you had for the day, but you had to get rid of it. It would go bad. But they, evidently, I don't know you could fry it probably, you could boil it. I don't know you could do all kinds of things with it, I guess, but it probably was still the same old manna. I think the Hebrew was, what is this, right? I don't remember. Is that right, Dan? That's what it means? What is this? Manna. What is this? It sounds like your kids when you put a plate down. What is this? I don't like it. Well, that's exactly what the children of Israel did. And they should have been old enough to know better. God had provided food for them. Well, obviously, maybe it wasn't. It was the same thing over and over and over and over again. You know, one of the things I think I could almost eat over and over and over, almost, is pizza. I mean, I can eat it cold, I can eat it hot, I don't care. Pizza, take it out of the refrigerator. Just pizza's like better than manna. Of course, the problem is they couldn't have anything with pork, and I like pepperoni and all the other stuff too, the sausage and all the other stuff. But God is so gracious because think about what He has given us in this life to eat. He has given, how many of you love a nice, maybe a baked or even fried piece of, I'm not talking about health, okay, I'm just talking about food. Baked or fried haddock or hake or maybe salmon. Salmon on a plank and something drizzled over it. Or how about, some like, I don't like fish. Too bad. That's good stuff. By the way, you can tell you don't like fish because I won't say it. Fish is brain food. We won't go any further than that. We'll leave it alone, okay? Well, I didn't say anything. I might have implied something, but maybe it's a nice baked or roasted piece of chicken or turkey. Maybe it's shake and bake. I don't know. Maybe it's your mom's fried chicken. Or maybe it's a big, juicy ribeye or porterhouse steak, aged to perfection, cooked to just the way you want it. You can almost, except it's like 2 inches thick, so you can almost cut it with your fork. And it tastes so good. Anybody hungry? But God has given us so much to eat. There's so much our appetites to eat and to drink. And be it foods, meats, vegetables, fruits, berries, grains, cereals, eggs, breads, cheese, dairy, of all sorts, cakes and pastries of all sorts. And we could go on and on and on, but let's move on because we will hear some stomachs growling pretty soon. But God has given us our appetites. Isn't that truthfully enjoyable when you sit down? It's always disappointing, when, Thanksgiving, you spend hours preparing a meal. Hours preparing this great big meal. And, 20 minutes, tops. It's usually done before that. You've eaten it all and enjoyed it, and you're sitting there going, I can't believe I ate the whole thing, So, Alka-Seltzer Plus, right? But God has given us that joy. The joy to sit around a table with friends at home or at a restaurant and to eat and to laugh and talk with one another and have that great appetite, that great time together, just that in the midst of all this monotonous and stuff that doesn't make any sense. The fourth thing that He gives us is the ability to see good in our labor in 13b and enjoy the good of all His labor. It is the gift of God. All these things are connected together like conjunctions. And then this last thing stands alone there. It is so referring to all these things. It is the gift of God. Life under the sun is basically the philosophy, I get what I earn. Yet life seen from an angle or from above the sun perspective is so much, much more. See, life under the sun doesn't recognize any of these things. Life above the sun realizes these are gifts from God. I can take joy in all that I'm able to accomplish here by way of my labors. Oh yes, I recognize those labors are temporary. I realize I can't take them with me. There's nothing going to go with me here but in the midst of it, I can take some joy in it. And one of the things that, if you're from Maine, one of the joys you can have, if you're from Arizona, you may not get this, but if you're from Maine, is to have your wood cut and split and stacked in undercover. And you got that all done, and if you burn wood to heat your home, you step back and you're like, this is so good. I hate to burn it, because then I got to put it back next year. But there's a sense of satisfaction, a sense of joy is there in a job that's been well done. Or you built something. You built a building, you built your home, whatever it is, and you step back and you're like, this is good. And you take some joy in it, even though you know it could burn tomorrow. And so there is a sense of satisfaction, a sense of joy in all of the labors that we do, especially when we recognize, no, they're not permanent, but God has given us a sense of that joy in accomplishing, doing what we can do with our hands and building or accomplishing whatever our work may be. And that's why Brooks Robinson said, I like to play the game. I like to do the work because I get joy out of whatever it is. Whatever it is you do. If you like what you do, they say you'll never work a day in your life. Well, quickly, there's more that could be said, but let's go on to verses 14 and 15, and I will pick up the steam a little bit here. Realize what God does in verse 4. What he gives, now what he does. First of all, the first thing, there's four things again. First thing, remember and realize what God does. Realize that God's works, his works are permanent. He says this, I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. There's little in this life under the sun that we could call permanent, except for maybe when from our perspective, we look at the earth and say, that's pretty permanent, just from under the sun. We know from above the sun, from what the scriptures tell us, eventually this old world and solar system and universe is going to be burned up, and he's going to create a new heaven and earth. And that's where we'll spend our eternity, in that. As I said before, as beautiful as this one is in a fallen nature, in the fallen world that we're in, as beautiful as this is, I can't imagine what a perfect one would be like. It's going to be incredible. There's so much beauty in this one, even though it's fallen, corrupted by sin. But Solomon says this, he says, I know that whatever God does, it remains forever. What God does and what he says is permanent. God's not fickle. He's not guessing. He's an all-knowing and all-powerful. And therefore, when he creates something, when he builds something, when he makes something, when he works something, when he speaks it, you got to understand this is permanent. And you and I, we may say something, because we believe it maybe, hopefully we're not lying, but we're telling the truth, what we believe, but you know what, we may have to modify it, because it wasn't quite exactly, I had some truth I didn't have at all, because my sources weren't right? That's not God. He doesn't ever have to say, oh, I just made a mistake. By the way, there are a lot of churches and groups out there that will say that God makes mistakes. Jesus made mistakes. No, he didn't. Or rather, It's all part of his permanent plan that he's working out and will one day be realized by all believers as we gather in his presence throughout eternity. It'll make sense. It doesn't now. It'll make sense. Next week I get to teach the cadets at the Academy Ethics again. It's one of the worst times of their lives in that first 2, 3, 4 weeks. I tell them, it doesn't make sense now. It'll make sense. Hang in there. Don't quit. It'll make sense. The second thing to realize is this: his works are perfect. Nothing can be added to it or nothing can be taken away from it. You know, I love this. Not only are God's words permanent, but they're perfect. They are complete. You know, in this life, not only do we not find as much that's permanent, but we find even, I think, less of things that are complete. And I think it's just an impossible task here under the sun. You know, God's word cannot be added to. His work cannot be added to, which means there's nothing missing from whatever he does. You know, sometimes, you know, it's like we expect God to do something a certain way because we've got it figured out what we need him to do. And so, God, you need to do it this way. And then it's not there, and we think, no, he forgot. He forgot something. No, he didn't. He didn't. Whatever he has done, it's perfect. And not only that, but nothing can be, it's nothing missing, and there's nothing that can be added or taken away from it. There's nothing that's excessive or wasteful in what God does. It's perfect. You know, I thought about this, and how many of you have ever bought something that had to be assembled? We've all done that, haven't we? It used to be you could buy everything you bought. It was always all put together for you, no matter what it was. But now to save money, it comes in a box. You know, it might be a 6-foot wide, 12-foot high cabinet with all kinds of doors and drawers on it, but it all comes in pieces. And you got to put it together. And so you open the box, and if you're a woman, the first thing you do is you read the instructions. And if you're a guy, you pull it all out, you get everything out, and you got to set the box over there, and you take the instruction and put those instructions over there, and you start building. Have I done these things before? How hard can it be? I mean, if a woman can do it, I can do it. And so you start building, and you put together whatever your whatchamacallit is, and you're doing it, and then you find that you get closer and closer to the end, and you find that, this bolt I got too short. Or it's too long, one or the other. And it won't work. And so you go back to the instructions, and it's like about 14 steps back was where you're supposed to use that one. And the one you put in there, you're supposed to use here. So you go back at it, and now you're forced to have to look at those instructions a little bit to make sure I don't do that again. Okay, and so you go at it now, and you go at it, you get almost done, and there's a bolt, or there's a screw, or there's a nut, or a washer, or there's a part that's missing. You get all done, and there's one part missing. Or it's a puzzle, and you get it all put together, and there's one piece missing. Listen, everything that God does is never too early. It is never too late. It is never too little. It is never too much. And there is never anything missing. And that's great to know, because here we are, we're stuck in this life, in this cycle of life, of birth and death, and everything in between, that are cycles that are going on of love and hate and war and peace and tearing and sowing and tearing down and building up and throwing stones and gathering stones and all of these things that we don't really have any control of because they're going to happen at a certain time. But in the midst of it, God is working. And no matter what, whatever he does, it's perfect. The third thing that God's work does is it brings praise. I think with the result of the first four things in verses 12 and 13, and these two things here that we've already talked about in the first part of verse 14, is that his works bring praise. And God does it that men should fear before him. the fear that Solomon's speaking of is not necessarily that kind of shaking in one's boots kind of fear. If you don't know God or recognize God, that would be an appropriate kind of reverence to show to God. It would be wise. But it's not necessarily that. It's more to have to do with one's awe or reverence. When Tammy and I had the opportunity a few years ago, to travel out to California to visit with Alethea while Stephen was out on the ship, I guess, at that time. I'm not sure if he was in Japan or on the ship. I can't remember which it was, but we got to stop to the Grand Canyon. And so we had planned our trip in such a way that we could hit these things. So Tammy had planned our trip in such a way. I'll give her the credit. She did that. And so we got out through there. We got to the Grand Canyon. We went to the Visitor Center on the South Rim there. We went in and watched the little video they had, little movie they had, and how they're trying to explain how this all happened. And it's like, I already know how it happens. Let's get going. I already know. It's called the flood. And it was a big amount of water that went all down in a little short period of time. Not that little tiny bit of water way down there over I don't know how much time, because that ain't ever going to bring in from every angle you could see. And so we did all that, and then we go out, we finally get out. You go out through the back of the visitor center, and you go out, and there's walkways and whatnot, and you walk right over to the edge. Right over to the, I hate heights, right over to the edge. It's like, right, it's like, there might be this little thin rail. The only thing I can think of is the thing that bends right over and goes, And it's a mile down. And it's 18 miles out there. And you can look right across. It's 18 miles right across. And then however long it is, as far as you can see either way. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever seen it, but I know when Tammy and I stood there, we didn't say nothing. We didn't say anything. We just stood there. I just looked. My senses were overwhelmed. It's almost like did someone just kind of like bring you into this big room and paint this thing out in front of you? Because it's almost surreal. It's like it can't be. I felt so insignificant as I stood there and I looked out across there. It's the same kind of insignificance that I feel sometimes when I love to look at the stars and you go out in a field, especially this time of year, you go out in a field because the atmosphere is so clear. And you can look at stars and like the depth of stars, and you're just standing there between you, and there's nothing between you and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of light years away, and the things you can see. And nothing, and you how insignificant you are. You're on this big earth, and you're standing out there in this field. There's nothing between you to all that. Okay, I'm weird, okay? Nobody does that, okay, I get it. But if I can have that sense of awe and respect for part of God's creation, tell me how I should respond to the one who created it all. You know what I mean? And so in reality, all of God's works should lead me to a sense of awe and respect, of fear, of praise to the one who I know, that I know him and he knows me. This God who did this, I know him personally. The one who's working in my life, in this life and in my life, who has a plan for me and everyone who loves him. What else can I do but offer him my praise and adoration, and yes, my awe and my respect. Finally, in verse 15, Solomon reminds us of one more thing. His work brings preparation. I needed a P. The word would be better if I said teaching or learning, maybe. But teaching and learning is supposed to prepare us, right? So that's the best I could do. That which has already been, that which is, has already been. And what is to be has already been. And God requires an account of what is past. Now, at first you might look at that, well, that's quite a riddle. Can you riddle me this? Can you figure this out? Actually, it's not that difficult when you look at everything we've just been talking about. Take it by itself, and what is he talking about? Well, he's talking about the order that he has put into place, all of these cycles of life, the things that you and I have no control over, but he's working out his plan. He set this thing into order. So the thing that is has already been. It's already happened. You're not the first person that happened to. Right? And the thing that is going to be, you're not into it yet, but you're going to be into it at some point. You're going to die someday. Guess what? You're not the first one to die. It's already happened. And God is using this order of things that he put into place, this cycle of things that is true with all men and all women. If you're on this life under the sun, that it's all the same. And it's happening. And God is using these cycles, for you and I to learn something. To learn what he's given us. And to learn what he's doing. To have a bigger picture, even under the sun, to learn these things, but with a view that we have to see it from his perspective. And God in his patience, and how many times do we have to go through the same lesson to learn it? You know, a word to the wise is sufficient, but a fool must be pounded on the head. He's patient. He'll put us through the same cycles. Over and over and over again, that we might learn. That we might learn. Because he's the one that keeps the grades. He's the one who requires an account of what is past. Of what has happened. How did you respond? What did you do? All of those things. God's plan for fallen man is complete and it's permanent until it has been accomplished. God is patient and long-suffering to continue the cycles that we spoke of over and over and over again until we get it. And then, when we get it, he'll continue to teach us. Before we close, think about two things quickly from these 15 verses. First, remember this, that our life, all life for that matter, comes from only one God who is above and beyond the sun. This didn't just happen with just stuff under the sun. God initiated this and did this. And God created male and female, you and me, in his image. He didn't create the animals in his image. You and me. And so all life, in your life, comes from God, the one who is above the sun. Second thing, remember that our life includes supernatural life and power from God. You know, I think often when I read the Bible, I think you too, when we read the stories of God's great miraculous work and his power, and I think in the Old Testament, when he stopped the sun for a little while, when he opened the waters of the Red Sea or the waters of the Jordan, when he did these miraculous things, when a few soldiers wiped out many thousands. When I get in the New Testament and Jesus healed the blind and he made the lame to walk, and it wasn't like he could just throw the crutches away and get up and run. He didn't have to, no atrophy. It's all good. When I think about that and amazed by those things, I need to be reminded myself that the same God who has given you and I supernatural life, it's the same God. He took us from being spiritually dead and making us alive eternally. And he's going to resurrect these bodies someday as well, to perfection. Not quite sure how they can. No, never mind, we won't go there. And the power that he's going to use to do that he's given to us as life, to accomplish his plan here on this earth and ultimately in eternity, individually, corporately, and completely for his glory. You know, for the unbeliever, for the one who's ignorant of God and his ways, life here under the sun does look monotonous and empty and futile and vain and transitory. It doesn't make any sense. But for you and me, for the believer in Christ, from what I've seen, even in the midst of all these cycles, the life He's given us is a great adventure. Being lived out every day and learning every day to enjoy all that God has in it for us, what He's given us and what He does for us until we're with Him in glory. Now you thought when we started Ecclesiastes with the first sermon title, Life is Hard and Then You Die, is this not encouraging? As Solomon continues to unfold what he's learning, what he has learned and shared with us as he writes it out. Well, think on these things. Lord willing, we'll pick back up next week with another dilemma that he's thought about and how God handles that as well. Let's close in prayer. And James, would you close this, please?